There are women who are born knowing. They hold a wisdom beyond name and facts. History has called them witches, priestesses, healers. They are born carrying something ancient in their hearts, something that moves between worlds the way light moves through water, bending, reaching, finding its way into places darkness thought it had claimed forever. The world has spent generations trying to make them dim and forget their powers. But here is what no one understood about these women. You cannot silence a soul that was built to rise. You can delay it. You can suppress its voice. You can dress it in velvet and seat it at the right table and marry it to the right name. And then one day, one ordinary, extraordinary day, a kindred spirit walks in carrying a soul bond and deep love. Not the love that completes you. Not the love that saves you. A love as powerful as a phoenix rising. The love that holds up a mirror and says, "Look. Look at who you actually are. You have always been this." That is the key that opens every door, every portal. This is the story of a woman who had every door locked, every path predictable, and the man whose arrival set them all on fire. If you've been searching for shifter romance audiobooks with soul, you've just found your pack. Like this story. Leave a comment. Subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Your pack is waiting. The candles in Cassandra's chamber had been lit for an hour before she sat down at the mirror. She did not sit with anticipation or care. She sat the way she sat at most things required of her, with grace, with patience, and with a quiet, private exhaustion she had long since learned to keep below the surface where no one could see it. Her reflection looked back at her. Blonde hair arranged with the careful precision of Lady Marith, her handmaiden, who had spent 40 minutes constructing something meant to appear effortless. Amber eyes, flecked with green at their edges, a detail most people never noticed because most people did not look at her long enough to find it. A gown of deep forest green velvet that fell from her shoulders to the floor with the stillness that expensive fabrics and genius craftsmanship were made for. She looked precisely like a king's daughter. She felt nothing like herself. "You're being dramatic," she told her reflection. The woman in the mirror had no response. The truth was simpler than drama and considerably harder to live with. Cassandra Silverchannel was 22 years old, had been raised in one of the most privileged households on the continent of Avarenthia, and had spent the better part of a decade feeling she had been placed, through some cosmic administrative error, in entirely the wrong life. She reached up and touched the necklace at her throat. Gold, warm from her skin, a slim chain holding a pendant she had worn since she was so young, a crescent moon surrounded by 3 small stars, delicate and precise. Her mother had pressed it into her hands when Cassandra was barely 4 years old, had knelt down to her level with those green eyes that always seemed to be saying more than her mouth was, and had said, "This is your protection, my love. Promise me you'll wear it always." She had promised. She had kept the promise for 18 years. She had never fully understood it. The necklace was warm tonight, warmer than usual, in a way she couldn't account for. A faint, persistent heat against her skin that had started an hour ago and had not stopped. She pressed her fingertips against the pendant and felt it pulse once, like a heartbeat that was not hers. She told herself it was nothing. She was very good at telling herself things were nothing. She thought, as she often did before events that required her full performance, of the forest. Not the manicured gardens of the Silverchannel Palace, with their sculpted hedges and stone fountains and paths that went exactly where they were designed to go. The real forest, the one that began beyond the eastern wall, where the trees were old enough to have their own gravity, and the undergrowth smelled of soil and cold water and something else, something she had never been able to name, that made her feel, when she breathed it in, as though she were finally exhaling after holding her breath for a very long time. She ran there. Not often. It required planning, the right hour, the right guard rotation, a handmaiden who knew how to say Lady Cassandra is resting with conviction. But when she managed it, when she could shed the gown and the careful posture and the measured voice and simply run through the trees with the early light cutting sideways between the branches, those were the only moments she felt completely real. Sometimes she felt like screaming until she remembered her father's voice. "Be quiet. Don't forget your manners." and resigned. These words had imprinted her mind, her subconscious, her spirit, her soul since she could remember. The animals never startled when she passed. That was the strange thing she had never told anyone. The deer lifted their heads and watched her with something that was not fear. The birds went quiet, not the alarmed quiet of flight, but a listening quiet, as though they were paying attention. Once, a hawk had landed on the stone wall beside her while she sat catching her breath, and had tilted its head and looked at her with such specific, intelligent attention that she had felt, absurdly, that it had something to say. "You're imagining things," she had told herself. She was always telling herself that. She thought, too, of the palace healers, the small society of practitioners who moved through the corridors of the Silver Channel Court with their tools and their quiet confidence, and their particular way of speaking to each other. A shorthand built from years of shared knowledge that sounded to Cassandra like a language she had been born knowing and had somehow been prevented from speaking. She found reasons to linger near the healing rooms. She listened to their consultations with an attention she gave to almost nothing else, her whole body oriented toward their words the way a plant oriented toward light. She had never admitted this to anyone. Being the daughter of a king was, in many ways, the art of having an entire interior life that never appeared on your face. The knock at her door had the particular cadence of her father's hand. 3 measured strikes, each equally weighted. The knock of a man who had reduced even the act of requesting entry into something that communicated authority. "Come in," Cassandra said. King Connor Silver Channel entered the room with the absolute certainty that wherever he stood, he was the room's center of gravity. He was tall, blonde going to silver at the temples, with a face that had been handsome in his youth and had become something more formidable with age. The angularity sharper, the blue eyes more remote, as though the years had stripped away whatever warmth might once have softened him and left only the architecture underneath. He looked at his youngest daughter, said nothing for a moment. "You look well," he said finally. Not a compliment, an assessment. "Thank you, Father." He moved to the window and stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the torchlit approach where the first carriages were already arriving. Lords from the Western Territories, emissaries from the Cressa Coast, and beyond them, the delegations he had been politically obligated to invite and personally found intolerable. The shifter packs, their alphas and betas, their entire elaborate architecture of power, arriving at his gate with the ease of people who understood that the gate was open because they had made it impossible to keep it closed. "You will conduct yourself this evening with the appropriate representation of this household," he said, without turning. "I always do. Your sister Katya is 25. She has made no arrangement. Your sister Alicia understood her responsibilities at a younger age than either of you." There it was, not spoken as a threat, because King Connor Silver Channel never spoke threats aloud, which was precisely what made them effective, simply stated as a fact, as though the world had already agreed with him and was simply waiting to be informed. "If you are not willing to consider your future," he said, "I will be required to do so on your behalf." Cassandra looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, that permanent tension, as though he were bracing for something that never came or perhaps had come long ago and never left. She had thought when she was younger that he was simply a cold man. She understood now that he was something more specific than cold. He was a man carrying something he had never put down and had never spoken about, and the weight of it had pressed him into this shape, this remote, precise, carefully controlled shape, over so many years that he had probably forgotten there had ever been another. She did not know what the thing was. She only knew it was there. "I understand," she said. He turned to leave. At the door he paused, and she saw his gaze move, briefly and involuntarily, to the necklace at her throat. A fraction of a second. He looked away before she could be certain she had seen it. The door closed. The room was quiet. The necklace pulsed twice against her skin. Katya arrived minutes later in a cloud of rosewater and excitement, 25 years old and entirely unashamed of the particular brightness she brought to evenings like this one. Her blonde hair was swept up with jeweled pins, her blue eyes carrying the warmth of someone for whom tonight represented something genuinely possible. "You look beautiful," she said immediately, because Katya said this to everyone and meant it every time, which was one of the things Cassandra found entirely impossible to be cynical about. "So do you." Katya sat on the edge of the bed, the only person who ever sat on Cassandra's furniture as though it were her own, and looked at her with the expression she got when she was about to say something she had already rehearsed. "I have a feeling," she said, "that tonight is significant. For the diplomatic negotiations, certainly." Cassandra. Patient. Redirecting. "There are going to be princes tonight. Lords, alphas, men from every territory on the continent. Don't you ever feel it? That wanting? That sense of someone being out there, waiting to be found?" Cassandra looked at her sister. This woman who was 3 years older and beautiful and free, who had never married because she was waiting for the exact right feeling, who measured the value of an evening entirely by the quality of the men she might meet in it. She was not shallow, Cassandra thought. She was something more specific. Someone who had built her entire sense of self around the promise of being found. As though she were a treasure waiting for someone to realize her worth, rather than a person who might go out and determine her own. Was the end result of a life well lived really just this? To be chosen by the right person and live comfortably and call that the destination? She didn't say this. She would never say this to Katya, who meant no harm and sought no damage and wanted genuinely and simply to love and be loved. "I feel other things," she said instead. "Like what?" "Like the pull of the forest at dawn. Like the way the animals go still when I pass. Like the hollow feeling I carry every time I watch the healers doing their craft, somehow knowing, that I could do what they do if anyone had ever thought to teach me. Like the feeling," she said carefully, "that I am supposed to be doing something I have never been allowed to do." Katya smiled the smile she used when Cassandra said things she chose to find endearing rather than alarming. "Tonight," she said, "you might find someone who makes you forget about that." Cassandra turned back to her mirror. She did not want to forget. She had spent her entire life forgetting, and she was tired of it in a way that had no name yet. A bone-deep, quiet, persistent exhaustion with the act of being less than she was, of fitting herself into spaces that were too small, of looking at her reflection and seeing only what was required, rather than what was true. "Don't you have other ambitions?" she had once asked Katya, in a moment of unguarded honesty. "Beyond love, beyond a home." And Katya had looked at her with genuine surprise and said, "But Cassandra, what else is there?" She had not known how to answer. She still didn't. Only that somewhere in her chest, something had answered for her. Something that had no words yet, and only had the feeling of a door she had never been permitted to open. Alicia arrived at the chamber door just as they were preparing to leave, composed, dark-haired, beautiful, in the careful way of someone who had decided that beauty was a language and had chosen to speak it fluently. Married 6 years ago to Lord Edric Voss, in a ceremony everyone agreed was entirely suitable. She spoke of him with measured warmth that contained everything expected and nothing excessive. She looked at Cassandra, and Cassandra looked at her, and in that look, the way sisters sometimes communicated entire conversations without a syllable, Cassandra saw something that had nothing to do with the evening ahead. She saw a woman who had once, a very long time ago, had something in her eyes that didn't quite belong to this world, and who no longer had it. This, Cassandra thought, is what I am afraid of. Not the wrong man, not the wrong marriage, the wrong becoming. The slow, painless, perfectly acceptable process of turning into someone who no longer remembers what she was reaching for. "Shall we?" Alicia said. Cassandra took her arm. They walked toward the gala, all three of them, the resigned one, the hopeful one, and the one who was, without yet knowing it, about to remember everything. The necklace pulsed against her skin all the way down the corridor. The road to the Silver Channel Palace ran through the neutral territories for 3 days before it reached the coast. Alpha King Menelik Gryffindor had made this journey twice before. Once as a boy of 14, accompanying his father on a diplomatic exchange that had taught him more about the nature of human kings than any archive in the Gryffindor library. And once at 26, in the first year of his reign, when the Western Territories diplomats had needed to sign a treaty that would buy peace between human and wolves through shared trading routes. Both times he had arrived as himself. Tonight was different. He sat in the carriage with his back straight and his arms resting loosely on his knees, wearing the uniform of a Gryffindor senior guard, dark wool, silver insignia, the kind of clothing that communicated authority without announcing identity. It fit him the way uniforms never quite fit the men they were not made for, correctly in every measurement and wrong in every other way. Across from him, Beta Stanford Crest wore the Alpha King's traveling robes with the ease of a man who had spent 11 years learning to occupy whatever space Alpha King Menelik required of him. The formal collar, the house seal at his chest, the particular expression, not arrogant but settled, the expression of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything, that Beta Stanford Crest had studied and replicated with the thoroughness he brought to everything. He looked, Alpha King Menelik thought, entirely convincing. Regal. "You're doing it again," Beta Stanford Crest said, without looking up from the diplomatic brief he was reading. "Doing what?" "The thing where you look at me as though you're calculating how quickly this could go wrong." "I'm always calculating how quickly things could go wrong. This is different." Beta Stanford Crest turned a page. "This is the version where you've already identified the 17 ways it goes wrong, and you're now entertaining an 18th. Alpha King Menelik said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The truth was that the calculation was not primarily about the disguise. Beta Stanford Crest was capable, more than capable, entirely reliable in the way that only a man who had chosen loyalty as a vocation, rather than an obligation, could be. The plan was sound. King Connor Silverchannel, who had never met Alpha King Menelik in person, who knew his face only from the painted portraits that circulated through diplomatic channels, would see what he expected to see. A king's entourage, an Alpha's Beta presenting as the principal figure, a guard standing slightly to the left with the watchful stillness of someone whose purpose was protection. What King Connor Silverchannel would not see, what Alpha King Menelik needed him not to see, was the man who had spent the past 6 months assembling, piece by careful piece, a comprehensive portrait of everything King Connor Silverchannel had done and hidden and decided in the past 30 years. His intelligence had reported a raging conflict brewing beneath the surface, and King Connor Silverchannel was at the center of all of it. Alpha King Menelik needed to speak to him like a man spoke to another man when neither of them was performing for an audience. He needed to see his face when certain things were said. He needed to blend with his staff and hear what they might allow themselves to say. He needed, above all, to understand whether this king was a man who could be reasoned with or a man who had moved beyond the reach of reason entirely. And he needed to see with his own eyes the daughters, not for the reason his council assumed. His council, who had been presenting him with candidates for Luna for a decade and had learned to do so with the resigned creativity of people trying to solve a problem they were not certain was solvable, had immediately interpreted his interest in King Connor Silverchannel's daughters as a potential political arrangement. He had not corrected them. Political arrangements were a language his council understood, and he had long since learned that the most efficient way to manage his council was to give them something accurate to believe that was also incomplete. The truth was more specific than politics. His seers had been telling him the same thing for 3 years, in the particular way that seers told things, obliquely, in fragments, with the maddening certainty of people who could see the destination, but not always the road. A woman of the old blood, they said. A woman whose power has been sleeping. She is in the West. She does not know what she is. His most trusted medium, an ancient woman named Sarah, who had served his father before him, had added one detail that the others had not. She wears something not hers, something heavy in spirit, but not in weight. When it is removed, you will both know. Know what? He had asked. We cannot know yet, my king, Sarah had answered. You are called the Dragon Wolf. She might need your fire. He had not told Beta Stanford Crest this. Beta Stanford Crest's relationship with seer knowledge was one of respectful, functional skepticism. He used the information when it was actionable, and filed it under unconfirmed when it was not. It was one of his best qualities and occasionally his most limiting one. "The Silver Channel daughters," Alpha King Menelik said. Beta Stanford Crest looked up. "The youngest one, what do the reports say?" 22, educated as expected. No significant political engagements, no prospect. Beta Stanford Crest paused, the particular pause of a man who had more to say and was deciding how much of it was relevant. "The palace staff describe her as quiet, reserved. One of our contacts, the healer's apprentice, says she has been seen in the medical wing on several occasions with no explained purpose. Just listening." Alpha King Menelik was quiet for a moment. "And the necklace?" Beta Stanford Crest's eyes sharpened. "You know about the necklace." "Sarah mentioned it." The contact mentioned it also. Beta Stanford Crest set down the brief. "Gold chain, crescent moon pendant with 3 stars. She never removes it. Has worn it since childhood." He looked at Alpha King Menelik directly, in the way he looked at things he was not yet certain about. "Should I be concerned about the direction this is going?" "No, that was very fast." "I said no, Stanford." Beta Stanford Crest held his gaze for a moment, then returned to his brief with the expression of a man who had logged his concern in the appropriate internal register and would return to it at the appropriate moment. "You understand," Beta Stanford Crest said, "that if anyone recognizes you, this entire arrangement collapses." "No one will recognize me. You are 6.5 feet tall." "I am a guard," Alpha King Menelik said. "People do not look at guards." Beta Stanford Crest's blue-green eyes were flat with the particular patience of a man who has had this argument before and knows exactly how it ends. "King Connor Silver Channel," Alpha King Menelik said, looking out at the approach, "is a man who speaks differently to power than he speaks to the people serving it. I need to hear how he speaks when he believes no one important is listening before announcing myself. And if he recognizes you and takes it as an insult, then I will remind him that I came to his gala at all, which is more diplomatic goodwill than he deserves." Beta Stanford Crest said nothing. He had long ago learned that Alpha King Menelik's instincts, when they were this quiet and this certain, were not worth arguing against. "Then you know what happened to their mother." The line of Alpha King Menelik's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said. "I know." The carriage rolled on through the torchlit gates, and neither of them spoke again until the palace doors opened and the theater began. The grand gala of the continent of Avarenthia smelled when Alpha King Menelik entered with Beta Stanford Crest and a small guard contingent of 100 competing perfumes and the particular tension of people who were performing goodwill toward one another while privately tracking every exchange for strategic advantage. A cacophony of sound hit his ears like a blade. He immediately placed the mental field he had perfected in such conditions. He moved through the great hall with the unhurried attention of someone whose purpose was observation rather than presentation. Several faces turned toward Beta Stanford Crest. The correct faces, the ones who would have been briefed on the Gryffindor delegation's attendance. Some tried to hide their unease at seeing so many perceived predators in one room and failed. Others looked with fascination. He watched his Beta receive the attention of 3 separate nobles and handle each with precise calibration. His gaze simply moved. His wolf knew before his eyes confirmed it. The way a shifter always knew, through the crowd, through the noise and the perfume and the 300 bodies occupying the same space. A pull so precise and so absolute that it required no navigation. He did not find her. He simply looked where she already was. Forest green gown, blonde hair, a nobleman speaking at length about something she was not listening to, her face composed in the precise performance of attention, while the actual self was somewhere else entirely. He recognized it immediately. He had been doing exactly the same thing in rooms for most of his adult life. His wolf moved, not subtly, not the controlled cataloging of the past 3 days. It moved the way it moved when something fundamental was happening, with the full weight of everything he was, every instinct he possessed, every year of discipline orienting in a single direction with the absolute certainty of a compass finding north. He stood very still. across the room, as though she had felt the shift in the air. And perhaps she had, because he was already understanding that this woman felt more than she admitted to. She turned her head. Their eyes met. His wolf said one word. It did not need to say it twice. Alpha King Menelik took a slow breath and waited for the moment to pass into the next one, which it did. The way moments did when they were the kind that changed everything, without announcement, without apology, with only the simple, total finality of a door that has opened and cannot be closed again. Across the room, the daughter of King Connor Silverchannel looked away first. Her hand went to her necklace, and the necklace he could see even at this distance was glowing. At that moment, Alpha King Menelik knew he could not approach her without a plan. He forced himself to look away. Cassandra was not bored exactly. Bored implied an absence of stimulation. What she felt was more specific. A kind of overstimulation that had nothing to do with her. The sensation of being surrounded by noise that did not include her frequency. The grand hall of her father's palace had been transformed for the occasion. Long tables dressed in white and silver, candles in iron chandeliers that cast everything in warm, shifting light, and perhaps 300 people moving through it all, with the careful energy of those who knew they were being watched, and had decided to be worth watching. She stood near the east window, and half listened to Lord Fenmore of the Cressa territories, who was 28 and handsome, and explaining his family's position on the eastern trade routes, with the earnest conviction of a man who believed this was interesting. She made the appropriate responses. She had been making appropriate responses since she was old enough to understand what they were. And then something changed. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in the room's atmosphere so subtle that she would have missed it if she had not spent years training herself to notice exactly this kind of thing. A change in pressure, almost. The way the conversations near the entrance continued their surface motion, while something underneath them rearranged itself. The way water looked the same from above, even when the current below had changed direction. She turned her head. The Gryffindor delegation had arrived. She could see the man being presented as Alpha King Menelik, tall, broad, dressed in the charcoal and silver of the Gryffindor house, receiving her father's greeting with the composed courtesy of someone accustomed to being received. The room's attention had tilted toward him with the collective movement of people reassessing where the power in a room resided. In a second, Cassandra noted him, filed him, moved on. Her gaze, entirely without her instruction, went to the guard standing 2 steps behind and to the left. She did not know why. He was not doing anything that should have drawn attention. He was standing the way guards stood, positioned, watchful, occupying his post with the practiced stillness of someone whose purpose was to be invisible. His uniform was plain, his hands at his sides. There was nothing about him that announced itself. And yet, he was very tall, taller than anyone else in the room. The thing was something she did not have a precise word for, a quality of presence, of being entirely and completely in his own body in a way that most people, she was realizing as she stood there, were not. Most people leaked a little. Their attention wandered to the edges, their weight shifted. This man was still the way a mountain was still. Not because nothing was happening, but because what was happening was entirely interior and entirely sufficient. And she felt a shiver down her spine. She turned her head again. Time stopped. He was looking at her, not the way Lord Fenmore had been looking, with the performed interest of a man who had decided she was worth performing interest at. Not the way her father looked at her, with authority, with the calculation of someone managing an asset. He was looking at her the way she sometimes felt the hawk had looked at her, from the stone wall in the eastern garden, with specific, unhurried, total attention, as though she were the answer to a question he had been carrying for a very long time, and had just, in this moment, heard spoken aloud. Her heart did something she had never felt it do before. Then he turned his head. Something more foundational than a flutter. A deep, structural recognition. A resonance in her chest that had nothing to do with her mind, and everything to do with something considerably older. The necklace burned. She turned away. Lord Fenmore was still talking. She made the appropriate response. She held herself composed and breathed, and told herself, with the quiet desperation of someone who has always managed to talk herself down from things, that she was being fanciful. She did not look back. She lasted 4 minutes. When she looked again, he was still watching her, and this time he held his gaze. She went to the terrace because she needed air, and because she needed to be somewhere that was not inside the specific radius of that gaze, which had the peculiar quality of being felt even when she was not looking at it. The way you felt the sun on your back, without needing to turn around and confirm it was there. The terrace of the Silver Channel Palace overlooked the city of Cascavel. The air smelled of salt and night-blooming jasmine from the garden below, and something else. Something she associated with the forest, and had not expected to encounter here. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps. She hadn't heard footsteps. Simply a presence, the same shift in the air she had felt inside, and she knew before she turned that it was him. He was standing at the terrace's edge, looking out at the city, and then he turned and looked at her. And up close, his eyes were gray, deep, still gray, the color of the sea in winter, the color of old stone. Intense in a way that did not perform its intensity. Simply there, the way deep things were simply there. The particular quality of his stillness. The faint amber warmth she could sense at the edges of his presence that was not body heat alone. She had grown up in a court that negotiated with shifters, had observed them from careful distances her entire life, and she knew. He was a werewolf. She was certain of it. She was not afraid. This surprised her, given that it probably should have produced something in that direction. Instead, she felt, and she would turn this over in her mind for days afterward, she felt located. As though she had been slightly out of register with the world for her entire life, and something had just, without asking permission, clicked her back into alignment. "You are the king's daughter," he said. "Lady Cassandra." His voice was low and even. It carried the slight formality of someone choosing their words with care, which she found she appreciated. "I am," she said. She did not ask his name in return. She was not sure why, only that not knowing his name would somehow reduce the storm she felt inside. "You're with the Gryffindor delegation." "I am." A silence settled between them that was not uncomfortable, which was unusual. Most silences with people she had just met required filling. This one simply existed, and she existed in it, and the necklace at her throat continued its low, persistent burn. "You feel it," he said. It was not quite a question. Her pulse spiked. She kept her face composed with the particular skill of someone who had been practicing it since childhood. "I don't know what you mean." He looked at her steadily. "I can hear your heartbeat," he said simply, without accusation or triumph, just as a fact, offered to the air between them. "And I can sense in you an emotion of considerable intensity. If you want us to understand each other, Lady Cassandra, it will require more honesty than that." She looked at him. He was right. She knew he was right. She had been managing her interior life for so long that the management had become reflexive, automatic, a habit so deep she had stopped noticing it was a choice. But he was looking at her with those gray winter sea eyes and telling her quietly that in his presence, the management was visible, and something in her was deeply, privately, exhausted by the prospect of performing it for one more evening. "I feel something," she said finally. "I cannot name it." Something moved in his eyes, warmth quickly contained. "That is honest enough," he said. He looked at her then. His gaze dropped, briefly and deliberately, to the necklace at her throat. In the torchlight, she saw his expression intensify. Not alarm. Something more like recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has been briefed and has just confirmed that the briefing was accurate. "Your necklace," he said. "Does it always do that?" She looked down. In the torchlight, the pendant was faintly visible through the fabric of her gown, and she could feel the heat of it against her sternum. Not painful yet, but insistent, the way a warning was insistent before it became urgent. She pulled it from beneath her neckline without thinking, holding the pendant in her palm, and the heat was immediate and sharp enough that she inhaled. His eyes went to it, then back to her face. and in them she saw something she would not understand until the following morning. A certainty so complete it had no edges, no uncertainty at its borders, no room for doubt. "Tomorrow," he said, "at dawn, near the stables." His voice was quiet, carrying the weight of someone who is about to offer something that will cost the recipient significantly to receive. "I have truths to tell you. Will you come?" She thought of her mother's green eyes, of the last thing Sylvia Silverchannel had said to her daughter before her voice left her entirely, whispered in the dark of a sick room that smelled of fever and something beneath it, something Cassandra had never been able to name. "Never forget who you are, my darling. The truth is a treasure that opens every door." "Yes," Cassandra said. He took her hand. He raised it to his lips, unhurried, deliberate, a gesture from a different era that somehow suited him entirely. His lips were warm against her knuckles. Then he breathed in, a long, slow inhale, and when he raised his eyes to hers, they were luminous, lit from somewhere inside. The gray shot through with something golden and ancient. "I would have stayed here all evening," he said quietly. But the etiquette of this gathering would not have permitted it. He released her hand. He walked back through the terrace doors and disappeared into the crowd, and Cassandra stood at the edge of the city with her hand still raised slightly, and her heart conducting itself with complete disregard for her composure, and the necklace cooling slowly against her skin. Inside, she could see him, the guard, her guard in her mind already, though she had no right to the possessive, standing at his post, and once, just once, he looked across the crowded hall directly at her through the glass doors. She did not look away this time. She did not sleep. Cassandra had always been a light sleeper, the kind whose mind continued its quiet, relentless activity long after the body had been instructed to rest. What was unusual was the quality of the wakefulness. Not the restless, circular thinking she was accustomed to, the kind that turned the same questions over and over until they were smooth from handling. This was something else. A charged, forward-leaning alertness, as though her entire interior self had rearranged its furniture in the night and was now sitting at the window, watching for something to arrive. She rose before the household. Dressed herself, Lady Meredith would have been horrified, choosing a pair of soft suede riding trousers the color of autumn grass, a warm, loose wool tunic in undyed cream, and low boots she could actually move in. She braided her own hair, plain, functional, entirely unsuitable for a king's daughter, and exactly right for the person she felt, this particular morning, that she actually was. She did not think too carefully about what she was doing. She had learned, in the forest, that thinking too carefully about things that needed to be felt was the fastest way to talk yourself out of them. The stables were at the eastern edge of the palace grounds, separated from the main building by a courtyard of old flagstone and 3 ancient chestnut trees that she had climbed as a girl. In secret, always in secret, because climbing trees was not something a Silverchannel daughter did where anyone could observe it. She smelled the horses and the hay and the cold morning air, and something else underneath. Pine and dark earth, and something that was not quite fire but occupied the same register, warm and low and entirely specific. He was already there. He was standing at the fence of the outer paddock, looking at the horses with the relaxed attention of someone who was genuinely interested in horses, rather than using them as an excuse to be somewhere. He had changed from last night. He wore all black now, a fitted shirt and riding trousers, a belt at his waist with a sword on each hip. 2 swords. She noted this with the part of her mind that noted things before the rest of her caught up. He turned when he heard her footsteps, not startled, simply turning, the way someone turned when they had known for several minutes that a person was approaching and had been waiting without impatience. In the gray dawn light, without the crowded room around him, and without the performance the evening had required of both of them, he looked. She searched for the word and found it immediately. Like himself. Whatever that meant. It meant something. She was certain of it. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I said I would." Something moved in his gray eyes, a warmth that arrived and did not retreat this time. "Walk with me," he said. It was not quite a command and not quite a request. It had the quality that she had noticed in him the night before. The particular confidence of someone who was not accustomed to being refused, and was also entirely not performing that confidence. It simply was. They moved through the eastern garden, past the old chestnut trees, through the gap in the stone wall where the formal grounds ended and the wild land began, into the small wood that pressed against the palace's boundary like something that had been there before the palace and intended to remain after it. She had run in this wood. Not often. The timing required precision. But enough that she knew its particular morning smell, the way the light came through the canopy in early autumn at this hour, the sound the leaves made underfoot when the frost had not yet come but was coming. He walked through it as though he had always walked through it. She could feel his presence beside her in a way that had no precedent in her experience. Not oppressive, not requiring management, simply there. She was aware of him the way she was aware of weather. Not external and separate, but part of the same atmosphere she was breathing. The necklace began to heat, not gradually, immediately, the moment they crossed beneath the first trees, a warmth that intensified with each step until it was pressing against her sternum, with insistence that was rapidly approaching discomfort. She pressed her hand against it through her tunic. He glanced at her hand, at her face. Something in his expression said he had expected this, and the fact that he had expected it was its own question that she was not yet asking. "Take it off," he said. She looked at him. "I know what it is," he said. Quiet, certain. The tone of a man in possession of information that he is about to share and understands will cost something to receive. "Take it off, Cassandra." She had not given him permission to use her name without title. She noticed that she did not mind. She reached behind her neck and unclasped the chain. Held the pendant in her palm, the crescent moon and 3 stars, warm gold, the piece of her mother she had carried against her skin for 18 years. The moment the clasp separated from her throat, the world changed. It was not subtle. It was not gradual. It was not the kind of thing that could be explained away with the mechanisms she had spent years constructing for exactly this kind of experience. It came all at once. A rush of sensation that began at the base of her feet and moved upward through her entire body, as though every closed door in her had swung open simultaneously. Flooding rooms that had been dark for so long the darkness had begun to seem like a feature rather than an absence. She heard the forest. Not the sounds of the forest. Those she had always heard. This was different. The forest itself, each tree a distinct and ancient presence, the roots beneath her feet carrying slow, deep information she had no language for, and somehow understood perfectly. The 2 horses in the paddock behind the wall. She felt their warmth and their breathing, as though they were extensions of her own body. Something moved in the canopy above, and she knew without looking that it was a hawk, and that it had been there since she entered the wood, and that it had been, in some sense she could not explain, waiting. That was a great deal in such a short time. Her legs gave way. He caught her immediately. Both hands at her arms, his grip firm and immediate, lowering her to the ground with a controlled ease that said this was not the first time he had caught someone, and was also something more than that, a care in it, a deliberateness that went beyond the mechanical. She was sitting on the cold earth with her back against an oak tree, and his hands still on her arms, and the world pouring into her from every direction, and she was breathing. He was breathing too. She noticed this. A long, slow, controlled breath, his hands tightening slightly on her arms and then releasing, and he quickly stepped back. 1 step. 2. Put distance between them with the focused deliberateness of a man exercising significant restraint. She looked up at him. His jaw was set. His gray eyes were darker than they had been. The gold she had seen in them the night before was there now more fully, lit from somewhere interior, and his hands, she noticed, were very still at his sides. "The bond," she said. She did not know where the word came from. It arrived fully formed, with the certainty of something remembered rather than learned. "Yes," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been. "Yes, indeed." She looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. Not from fear, she understood. From the sheer volume of what was moving through her, the way a cup trembled when it was too full. "You knew," she said. "Before you came to the gala, I knew there was someone. I did not know it was you until last night." She absorbed this. The hawk moved in the canopy above, and she felt it move, felt the air displaced by its wings, and the sensation was so startling and so completely right that she made a sound that was almost a laugh. "My whole life," she said, "I have told myself I was imagining things." Something moved through his face, swift and deep, and she thought personal, as though the sentence had landed in him somewhere that was not abstract. "You were not imagining anything," he said. "You were receiving. People have been raised to ignore the most fundamental power we all possess: intuition and the ability to receive messages from the unseen." She looked up at him. This mysterious man she had known for less than 12 hours, who was standing in the cold morning light of a wood she had always loved, with the expression of someone who had answers to questions she had been carrying alone for 22 years, and she felt, underneath the overwhelming rush of the opened world, underneath the trembling and the hawk and the roots beneath her feet, fury, quiet, specific, entirely directed, not at him. "The necklace," she said. "Someone put something in it for me." "Yes, it was there. To what? To keep this—" She gestured, unable to find the word for what this was. "From happening." "To keep it sleeping," he said carefully. "Not destroyed. Sleeping. There is a distinction there too, and it matters." She looked at the pendant in her palm. The crescent moon and 3 stars, ordinary gold in the morning light, and beneath it the memory of her mother pressing it into her hands. Her mother's green eyes saying more than her mouth was permitted to say. "This is your protection, my love. Not protection from the world," she understood now. Protection for what she carried, until she was old enough, until the right moment, until— "Tell me," she said, "everything." He sat down across from her on the roots of the oak, not beside her, at a respectful distance, facing her with the directness of a man who had decided to be honest and was going to do it completely. And he told her. He told her about the priestesses of the 3 realms, women of her maternal line, warriors and seers and commanders of the invisible, whose power skipped 1 generation and arrived in the daughters of Sylvia Silverchannel, like a river that ran underground for years and then surfaced, inevitable, where the ground was ready to receive it. He watched her face as he did, and she felt his watching. The quality of it. The specific attention of a man who was reading something he found extraordinary. She understood suddenly what it was that she had seen in him the previous evening, across the crowded room. He saw her, not the king's daughter, not the performance. Her, the version that ran in the forest and spoke to hawks and sat in the healing wing, wishing she had a language for what she felt, the version that had never fit inside the life she'd been given, and had spent 22 years quietly, politely suffocating in the attempt. He saw that version as clearly as though it were the only version that existed. She was not accustomed to being seen. "The swords," she said when he had finished. "Why do you carry 2? Something shifted in his expression. She would come to learn that this was what his amusement looked like. The particular change in the quality of his stillness, rather than anything so unguarded as a smile. "I was wondering when you'd ask." "Is 1 not enough for you?" She almost smiled. "I brought the 2nd one for you," he said. "Exercise is a perfect way to release grief and anger." He reached to his right side and drew 1. A single fluid motion, no ceremony, the sword simply appearing in his hand. He held it out to her, hilt first. "Take it." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "I've never touched a sword," she said. "I know you have wanted to and never thought twice about it," he said. "Take it." He was right. Sometimes she wondered how many adventures a warrior could live in his life. She took it. The moment her hand closed around the hilt, something happened that she had no category for. It was as though the sword recognized her, or as though some part of her, the part that had been sleeping under the necklace's enchantment for 18 years, recognized the sword. Somehow she knew. She had the soul of a warrior. Her grip adjusted itself without instruction. Weight distribution, angle of the wrist, the particular balance point between control and ease. And her body moved. She was on her feet. She did not remember standing. He was on his feet, too. She had barely registered him rising. And the sword she held moved, and his sword came up to meet it, and the sound of the impact rang through the quiet morning wood, and startled 3 birds from the canopy. She did not notice any of that, because she was completely, entirely, wholly inside the movement, inside the particular aliveness of it, inside the first thing she had ever done that used all of her simultaneously without remainder. He was giving ground. She noticed this with a detached interior shock that did not reach her hands. He was larger than her, and infinitely more experienced, and he was giving ground, not performing, not condescending, genuinely adjusting to something he had not anticipated. Their swords crossed. He was close enough that she could see the gold in his gray eyes clearly now, the warmth in them, the aliveness. She could smell him, amber and charcoal. She suddenly realized that a weight had been lifted from her chest, and she felt more alive than ever in her life. "For a first time," he said, "that is considerably more than promising." She stepped back, lowered the sword, looked at her own hand around the hilt as though it belonged to someone she was only just beginning to meet. "I don't understand," she said. "Your necklace was not the only thing sleeping." His voice was quiet, even. The voice of a man being careful with something he does not want to break. Everything it held back, every instinct, every memory in your blood, every inheritance from the women who came before you, it has been waiting. It knows what it is even when you don't. A pause. "You have always been this. The necklace simply convinced you otherwise." She stood in the morning wood with an ancient sword in her hand, and the hawk overhead, and the roots under her feet, and the bond between them resonating at a frequency that was still new enough to be startling. And she thought, my whole life I have been telling myself I was bound to oblivion." He was watching her. "Come with me to Gryffindor," he said, not asking, like a man stating a fact that was inevitable. She smiled. "I don't even know your name. In my world, the true bond of a wolf and his mate supersedes everything. This connection we share is older than us. We are destined to each other. You feel it. It's been stronger since you removed that necklace." "I don't know anything about you," she said. Cassandra's old self was trying to find what could go wrong even when her heart was singing. "You said," she finally said, "that you have things to tell me, things that are harder than this." His expression changed. The warmth remained, but underneath it something heavier arrived. The specific gravity of a man who is about to hand someone a truth they cannot return once they have it. "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman standing in the gray dawn light with his sword in her hand, amber eyes with green at their edges, the blood of 3 realms running in her veins, and the whole of herself finally, for the first time, awakening. "Your mother," he said, "did not die of illness." The wood was very quiet. The hawk did not move. And Cassandra Silverchannel, who had been telling herself for 10 years that the shape of her mother's death made sense if she looked at it the right way, felt the last piece of the story she had been given click into place. The way wrong pieces clicked. Not with satisfaction, but with the cold, clear precision of something finally, irrevocably confirmed. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. He did. She walked back through the palace the way she had walked out of it. In silence, through the gray corridors of early morning, past the guards who did not look at her because she had spent 22 years teaching them not to. But she was not the same person who had left. She could feel the difference in her own body, the way you felt the difference between a room with the windows sealed and a room with the windows open. The same room, the same walls, but the quality of the air entirely changed. She was breathing more than she had been breathing this morning. More than she had been breathing, she was beginning to suspect, for most of her life. The hawk had followed her to the edge of the wood. She had felt it land on the stone wall behind her as she crossed back into the formal gardens, had felt its attention on her back. Specific, particular, the attention of something that recognized her. She had turned and looked at it, and it had looked back. And for a moment the world had been very large and very simple simultaneously, the way it was in the forest when she was beginning to understand that a significant portion of what she had attributed to imagination over the course of her life was, in fact, knowledge, intuition, insight. Every time you hear a voice in your head, know it is a message. Ophelia Salvador lived at the edge of the merchant's quarter, in the part of Cascavel where the white stone buildings gave way to older, darker structures that had been there before the city decided it was a city, before anyone thought to give it a name or a king. The kind of streets where people asked fewer questions, because they had long since decided that the answers were rarely worth the asking. Cassandra walked there alone. She had told Lady Meredith she was visiting the morning market, which was true enough in the way that facts were true when they described the route without describing the destination. The house was narrower than its neighbors, 3 stories of dark stone with herbs drying in every window. Lavender, cedar, something she couldn't identify that smelled of old rain and wood smoke. The door was already open when she arrived. Not ajar, open, wide, deliberate, as though someone had opened it in advance of a specific arrival. She stepped inside. The woman sitting at the workbench in the center of the room was older than Cassandra had expected, or perhaps age was the wrong word, because she did not look diminished by it so much as deepened, the way certain materials became more interesting under the pressure of time. Her hair was entirely white, pulled back simply. Her hands, which were sorting dried herbs with the automatic ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times, were veined and precise, and entirely steady. Her eyes, when she looked up, were the dark amber of old honey, different in color from Cassandra's, but carrying something similar in quality. That same depth of looking that suggested the eyes were receiving more information than most people were sending. "You're late," Ophelia Salvador said, "by about 10 years. But that was never your fault." Cassandra stood in the doorway. "You were expecting me. I have been expecting you since you were 12 years old." She set down the herbs and folded her hands in her lap. "Sit down, child. We have a great deal to discuss, and I would prefer to do it without you standing in the entrance as though you might leave." Cassandra sat. She noticed the fireplace, gently burning on the left wall. Ophelia looked at her for a long moment, the thorough, unhurried assessment of someone reading something they have waited a long time to read. "You've removed it," she said. Her voice was neither surprised nor satisfied, simply noting a fact. "Last night, this morning," Cassandra paused, "you made it." "I did. And you made it to put your gifts to sleep," Ophelia said, "until the moment had come to wake them." "Yes." She held Cassandra's gaze without flinching. "I want you to understand something before you decide how to feel about that. Your father brought me to you believing I would suppress your nature permanently. What I did instead was preserve it. There is a difference between a door that is locked and a door that is sealed. One can be opened, one cannot. You made me spend 18 years not knowing who I was." The words came out even. She had not planned them. They were simply true, and in the absence of the necklace, true things seemed to arrive faster, and with less management required. Ophelia was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Not guilt exactly. Something older and more complicated than guilt. The specific weight of a person who has made a choice they knew would cost someone else something significant, and has carried the awareness of that cost ever since. "Yes," she said. "I did. And I will not insult you by telling you it was without cost." She paused. "I will tell you this. I saw your life. I see lives. It is what I do. It is what I have always done. It is the gift and the burden I have carried since I was younger than you are now. I saw what would happen to you if your gifts were visible to your father before you were safe, before you were strong enough, before you had the protection of someone who could stand between you and what he would have done with what you carry, Cassandra was quiet. Your gifts, Ophelia continued, are not the kind that can be controlled by someone else once they are fully awakened. But they can become a weapon, if not embodied. Your father understood that, even without understanding precisely what you were. He understood that the women of your mother's line were dangerous to anyone who wished to maintain power over them. So you put them to sleep? Until the right moment. Ophelia's amber eyes held hers. The moment arrived last night. A pause. Then quietly. Your sisters didn't have your luck. I've suppressed their gifts entirely. Cassandra's eyes widened. Alicia was starting to have bursts of anger and objects were moving around her. She was wild, strong, untamed. When your father understood something was happening, your mother told him everything about her hidden lineage of priestesses, and they came to me. I did what they told me to do. Ophelia's voice was low. I'm still paying the price. What price? Anyone who alters someone's destiny doesn't live without consequences. I've learned it the hard way. That's why for you, I took a different path. Cassandra felt in her bones the full weight the woman was carrying. A silence settled between them. Outside, a cart moved through the street below. The ordinary sounds of a city morning, entirely indifferent to what was happening in this room. My mother, Cassandra said. Ophelia's expression changed. Tell me about my mother, she said. Not what happened to her, what she was. Ophelia told it the way someone told a story they had been holding in trust for a very long time. Carefully, with the particular attention of a person who understood that the telling was itself a sacred act. Sylvia Silverchannel, born Sylvia Vielle of the coastal territories, had been the only daughter of a woman who had known exactly what their bloodline carried and had raised her daughter accordingly. In the old ways, the knowledge passed orally as it had always been passed. The lineage of the priestesses of the three realms, transmitted not through text or document, but through voice and memory, and the specific frequency of a mother speaking to a daughter in the language of their shared inheritance. She had been extraordinary, not in the performative sense of the word, not spectacular, not ostentatious, but in the literal sense, beyond what was ordinary, in a way that was quiet and continuous, and entirely integrated into everything she did. She knew the inheritance would go to her children as it always skipped one generation, but she was proud and honored, and had been taught everything she should know by her mother. Your grandmother could speak to the dead, Ophelia said. She could read intention in the air of a room the way a physician read symptoms in a body. She could stand at the edge of a battlefield and turn the tide not by fighting, but by reaching into the consciousness of every living creature present and shifting the balance of will. Sylvia wanted to teach that to her offspring too. She chose to marry your father, Ophelia said. That is important. It was not arranged. She chose him, because she saw in him something that she believed could be reached. A man who had loved and been afraid of that love, and had made choices from that fear that had cost him everything that mattered. She paused. She believed she could help him find his way back. Empathetic people must learn not to become saviors and forget themselves in the process. This you would learn too. Every healer does. Her gaze sharpened. Your father loved a shifter who chose to stay among her kind. Sylvia thought she could help him heal and love again, because she saw in him a soul calling for help. She was wrong, Cassandra said. She was not wrong, Ophelia said. She was early. What she planted in him is still growing. Whether it bears fruit in this lifetime is a separate question. She looked at her hands. She knew, toward the end, what was happening to her. She could not name it. The poison was designed to impair her voice first, but it took her life too. She could feel herself diminishing and could not see clearly enough to stop it. What she could do. Ophelia stopped. Her jaw tightened once. What she could do was hold on long enough to do two things. The first was to ensure that you kept the necklace. The second was to leave a message. Cassandra's throat tightened. What message? Ophelia reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew something small, a folded square of paper, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax the color of old blood. The seal was a crescent moon surrounded by 3 stars. She held it out. "She gave it to me the last time I saw her," Ophelia said. "2 weeks before she died. She said, 'Give it to her when she comes.'" Cassandra took it. She did not open it immediately. She held it in both hands and felt the paper. Felt it the way she now felt everything, with the full sensory attention of someone whose filters had been removed. And underneath the paper's dryness, she felt something that was not paper at all. Something warm. Something that recognized her hands the way the sword had recognized her hands, the way the hawk had recognized her face. She broke the seal. The handwriting inside was her mother's. She knew it from the birthday letters that had stopped when she was 12. That particular slant, the careful loops, the ease that looked like small open doors. "My darling, by the time you read this, you will have already begun to remember. The remembering will feel like waking up inside a life you thought you were already living. Do not be afraid of the size of it. You were born for the threshold, the place between the world of men and the world of what men cannot see. You will stand there not as a bridge to be crossed, but as a door that decides what passes. I could not tell you in words. I tried. God knows I tried. But the words were taken from me one by one, and I could not fight that taking, and also fight everything else. So I am telling you now, the only way I have left. You are a priestess of the 3 realms. You always have been. The necklace was a delay, not a denial, and there is a world of difference between the two. Do not waste your life being careful, my love. You were not made for careful. I am with you. I have always been with you. In the roots and the hawk and the thing you feel in your hands when you hold something that matters. I am there. Oh, my love, always, always your mother." Cassandra sat in Ophelia Salvador's workroom with the letter in her lap, and the morning light coming through the window, and the dried herbs, and the smell of old rain and wood smoke, and she cried. Not the careful, controlled tears of a king's daughter managing grief in a way that did not inconvenience anyone. The other kind, the kind that came from somewhere below management, below performance, from the place where everything that had been compressed for 22 years had found, at last, a way out. Ophelia did not speak. She did not touch her. She simply remained, held space, and that, Cassandra would think later, was its own kind of teaching. When it had passed, when the room had returned to its ordinary dimensions, and her breath had found its way back to even, Cassandra looked at the necklace in her palm. The gold caught the morning light and said nothing. "How do I—" She stopped. "How do I release it, the enchantment?" "The only way to release an enchantment woven into an object," Ophelia said, "is to return the object to fire. Objects hold memory the way stone holds cold, long after the source is gone. The enchantment will not dissolve on its own. It must be burned." Cassandra looked at the crescent moon and the 3 stars, the thing her mother had pressed into her 4-year-old hands with eyes that said more than her mouth was permitted to say, the thing she had worn against her skin for 18 years, the thing that had simultaneously imprisoned her and, in Ophelia's telling, protected her until she was ready. She held it out to Ophelia. Ophelia approached the fireplace and released it to the flames. The gold resisted for a moment, a brief, last resistance, the way things held on even when holding on was over. And then it yielded, and the flame went briefly and entirely blue, and the warmth that released from it moved through the room and through Cassandra's chest simultaneously, like the last breath of something that had been waiting to be let go. It was done. She heard the city the way she had heard the forest. Not louder, deeper. The particular consciousness of every living thing she passed. The thoughts and fears and hopes of the people moving through their mourning. Arriving at the edges of her awareness like light through a window she had not known was there. She did not try to hear them. She simply noticed that she could. She thought of her mother's letter. You were not made for careful. She thought of her mysterious guard, standing in the morning wood with gold in his gray eyes, giving ground to a woman who had never held a sword, watching her with the expression of a man who could see something she was only just beginning to see in herself. She thought of her father. That thought she held for a long moment, turning it over carefully, feeling its weight. She was going to need to look at him today with the knowledge of what he had done. and she was going to need to decide, before she walked into that room, what she was going to do with what she knew. She paused at the edge of the palace courtyard and looked up at the white towers of the Silver Channel Palace, and felt, for the first time in her memory, no pull toward them. No sense of arrival, of home, of return. Just stone, she thought. Just walls that someone built and called a home and handed down. She went inside. She needed a moment before confronting her father. The private meeting had been arranged for the second morning of the gala. Not in the throne room. King Connor Silverchannel had offered it, with the particular calculation of a man who understood that environments communicated hierarchies before a single word was spoken, and who had designed his throne room for exactly this purpose. Beta Stanford Crest had declined with the equally calculated courtesy of someone who understood the offer precisely, and was declining the hierarchy along with the room. They met instead in the map room. It was King Connor Silverchannel's suggestion, the second one, and Beta Stanford Crest had accepted it, which Alpha King Menelik, standing 2 steps behind and to the left in his guard's uniform, noted as the first genuine data point of the morning. The map room was where King Connor Silverchannel did his real thinking. The offer of it, even as a negotiating space, said something about how seriously he was taking this meeting. Good. Alpha King Menelik needed him serious. The room held 4 people. King Connor Silverchannel at the head of the long oak table, his chief advisor Lord Cornwell to his right. A thin man with the eyes of someone who had spent decades listening at the edge of other people's conversations, and had mistaken this for wisdom. Beta Stanford Crest at the opposite end, in the Alpha King's traveling coat, with the particular settled composure he wore when he was performing, and the particular alertness he wore when he was working, both present simultaneously, and Alpha King Menelik at the wall, hands clasped behind his back, wearing the stillness of someone whose purpose was protection. King Connor Silverchannel had looked at him once when he entered. Just once. A brief, comprehensive assessment, the kind that military men gave to other military men regardless of rank, the automatic cataloging of capability. His gaze had moved on without apparent conclusion, which meant he had reached one and filed it. Alpha King Menelik had spent 11 years reading the assessments of men who thought they were reading him. He knew what filed conclusions looked like. King Connor Silverchannel was not a stupid man. This was important to remember. Stupid men were manageable in straightforward ways. Intelligent men who had made terrible choices were considerably more complex. The Eastern Territories, Beta Stanford Crest began, have observed with interest the recent movements of Lord Marvel's coalition along the neutral border. King Connor Silverchannel's expression did not change. He represents independent interests. Lord Marvel represents 17 noble houses who have pledged material support to a coordinated military action against shifter settlements in the Northern Territories. Beta Stanford Crest's voice was even, informational, the tone of someone reading from a document, rather than making an accusation. The Alpha King is aware of the pledge amounts, the meeting dates, and the location of the munitions cache at Lord Marvel's secondary estate. A silence. Lord Cornwell's hands had tightened on the arms of his chair. King Connor Silverchannel's had not moved at all, which told Alpha King Menelik considerably more. That is a serious allegation, King Connor Silverchannel said. It is a serious fact, Beta Stanford Crest said. The distinction matters. Another silence. Alpha King Menelik watched King Connor Silverchannel's face. The controlled surface of it, the quality underneath that surface which was not quite what it appeared. He had read the intelligence reports on this man for 6 months. He had studied the architecture of his decisions, the pattern of his choices, the specific shape of what he protected and what he sacrificed. Standing in the same room, he was revising that understanding upward. King Connor Silverchannel was carrying more than the intelligence reports had captured. Something heavier and older than political ambition. Something that had been pressing on him for long enough that it had changed the quality of his stillness. Made it not the stillness of a controlled man, but the stillness of a man who had stopped moving, because movement in any direction led somewhere he had already decided he could not go. What does the Alpha King want? King Connor Silverchannel said. Alpha King Menelik stepped forward. He did not speak immediately. He moved from the wall to the table, unhurried, entirely without performance. And he sat down in the chair to Beta Stanford Crest's left, and he looked at King Connor Silverchannel across the oak table, and he watched the moment the king understood. It was not dramatic. King Connor Silverchannel was too controlled for drama. It was a single, comprehensive shift in his expression, the kind that happened when a significant amount of information arrived at once, and the mind required a moment to reorganize around it. His eyes moved to Beta Stanford Crest, who had removed the Alpha King's seal ring and was setting it quietly on the table between them, and then back to Alpha King Menelik. "You came," King Connor Silverchannel said, "as your own guard. At the gala, I needed to hear how you spoke when you believed no one important was listening," Alpha King Menelik said. His voice, in the map room's quiet, was the voice he used when he was not performing anything, low even, carrying the particular weight of someone who had made significant decisions and was comfortable with their cost. I found it informative. King Connor Silverchannel absorbed this. Something moved through his face, not anger, which Alpha King Menelik had prepared for. Something closer to a dark, exhausted respect. The recognition, perhaps, of a tactic he would have used himself. "Alpha King Menelik," he said. "King Connor Silverchannel." A silence that was different from the silences before. Two men in the same room without the architecture of performance between them, for perhaps the first time in the meeting. "The treaty," Alpha King Menelik said, "is genuine. Every term Beta Stanford Crest outlined stands. I did not come here to destroy you. I came here to establish whether destruction was necessary. I have concluded that it is not." He paused. "You are an intelligent man who has made decisions from a place of fear rather than strength. I have no particular interest in punishing that. I am interested in ensuring it does not extend to military action against my people." King Connor Silverchannel said nothing. "There is also," Alpha King Menelik said, "a personal matter." King Connor Silverchannel's eyes sharpened. The shift was subtle, a compression, a drawing in, the look of a man who has just understood that the terrain has changed beneath him and is calculating the new landscape. "Your daughter," Alpha King Menelik said. "Lady Cassandra." The room changed, not loudly. The change was in the quality of King Connor Silverchannel's stillness, which had been the stillness of a controlled man and became, in the space of 2 words, something else, something rawer, something that had nothing to do with politics. "She is my mate," Alpha King Menelik said, "recognized by my wolf, confirmed by the bond between us." He held King Connor Silverchannel's gaze with the directness of someone who understood that this moment required no softening. "I intend to make her my Luna, my queen. I am telling you this as a matter of respect for your position as her father, not as a request for permission, which is not mine to ask or yours to give. She will make her own choice." King Connor Silverchannel looked at him for a long moment. In the silence, Alpha King Menelik received something he had not expected. Not resistance, not the political calculation of a man assessing a strategic alliance, not even the protective fury of a father whose daughter was being claimed. Something underneath all of those things. Relief. The specific, bone-deep relief of a man who has been carrying a weight and has just been told, implicitly and irrevocably, that someone else is going to help carry it. That his youngest daughter, the one he had looked at across breakfast tables for 22 years with the knowledge of what he had done and what she did not know and what he could never repair, was going to be placed beyond the reach of his failures. Was going to be all right. Not because of anything he had done, despite everything he had done. "She is..." King Connor Silverchannel stopped. His jaw worked. He looked at the map on the wall, then back at Alpha King Menelik. "She is not easy," he said finally. "She never has been." "No," Alpha King Menelik said. Something moved in his gray eyes. Not quite amusement, something warmer than that. "She is not. She will not be managed. I have no intention of managing her," King Connor Silver Channel looked at him for another long moment. Then he looked at his hands, that gesture again, and said, quietly and entirely without inflection, "I know, not about the mate bond, not about the treaty, something larger than either. The acknowledgement of a man who had spent 30 years making choices that had led, through the particular logic of consequences, to this exact room, this exact conversation, this exact moment of sitting across from an Alpha King who knew everything and was not using it to destroy him. I know," he said again. And this time it meant, I know who she is. I have always known. I knew and I was afraid, and I tried to prevent it and I failed, and she is going to be extraordinary anyway, despite me, regardless of me, in ways I will never fully understand. Alpha King Menelik reached into his coat and withdrew a document. The treaty, drafted by his legal counsel, 2 copies, each bearing the Gryffindor seal. He set it on the table and did not push it across. He let it sit there between them, in the space where the conversation had just happened, and gave King Connor Silver Channel the moment he needed. King Connor Silver Channel picked up the document. He read it. Actually read it. Every line. With the attention of a man who understood that the details of agreements were where intentions revealed themselves. Alpha King Menelik waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the first things his father had taught him. The man who could wait longest in a silence usually won it. King Connor Silver Channel set the document down, picked up the pen from the desk behind him, signed both copies with the precise, unornamented signature of someone who had signed enough documents to have long since stripped the gesture of ceremony. He pushed both copies back across the table. Alpha King Menelik signed, handed one copy to Beta Stanford Crest, kept the other. "The Marvel Coalition," Alpha King Menelik said, rising. "Will be addressed," King Connor Silver Channel said. His voice had returned to its controlled register, but something in it was different from when he had walked into the room. Lighter, marginally, in a way that had nothing to do with the treaty, and everything to do with what had happened around its edges. Alpha King Menelik nodded once. Beta Stanford Crest gathered his materials. They moved toward the door. Alpha King Menelik turned. King Connor Silver Channel was looking at him with the blue eyes that his youngest daughter had not inherited. She had her mother's eyes, the green amber of something older and stranger and more alive, and his expression was the most unguarded Alpha King Menelik had seen it. "Take care of her," King Connor Silver Channel said. It was not a command. It had none of the weight of a king speaking to a subordinate. It was the voice of a man who understood that he had forfeited the right to make demands and was making a request instead. Simply, directly, from the only place he had left that was still honest. "With everything I am," Alpha King Menelik said. He walked out of the map room and into the corridor, and stood for a moment in the pale morning light, with Beta Stanford Crest at his side, and the signed treaty in his hand, and the weight of the morning settling around him. "Well," Beta Stanford Crest said after a moment. "Yes," Alpha King Menelik said. He signed. He was always going to sign. Beta Stanford Crest looked at him. "You knew. I knew that a man who has been carrying what he has been carrying for 30 years does not want more blood." Alpha King Menelik looked at the treaty in his hand, the Silver Channel seal beside the Gryffindor dragon, side by side for the first time in the history of either house. "He wants to put something down. We gave him somewhere to put it." Beta Stanford Crest was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular economy of a man who did not waste words, "And the girl?" Alpha King Menelik looked out the window at the palace courtyard, the old chestnut trees, the flagstones, the eastern wall beyond which the small wood began, where a woman had stood that morning with a sword in her hand, and the whole of herself, finally, for the first time, awake. "She is not a girl," he said. He walked on down the corridor, and Beta Stanford Crest, who had spent 11 years knowing when to follow without comment, followed. Her father was in his study. She knew this without being told. Knew it the way she now knew most things, through that quiet, continuous reception that had been operating beneath the surface of her awareness her entire life, and was now simply audible. His presence in the room had a quality she could feel from the corridor. dense, compressed, the particular atmosphere of a man who had been sitting alone with his thoughts long enough that the thoughts had begun to accumulate weight. She knocked. "Come." The study of King Connor Silver Channel was a room that said everything about him that he never said about himself. Dark wood, minimal ornamentation, maps on every wall, not decorative maps, working ones, covered in notation, in the small, precise marks of a man who spent significant time thinking about territory and its management. A single window overlooking the western courtyard. No portraits, no personal objects of any visible significance. He was standing at the window when she entered. He turned. She looked at him, really looked at him. She had expected guilt. She had expected the particular composite expression of a man whose crime was about to be named, some combination of defensive hardening and the faint, involuntary relief of a person who has been carrying a secret for so long that its revelation, however terrible, contains a grain of liberation. What she saw instead was exhaustion, not the exhaustion of last night or last week, the exhaustion of decades, deep and structural, the kind that had settled into the architecture of a person so completely that they had stopped perceiving it as exhaustion and simply experienced it as the texture of being alive. He looked, standing at his window in the morning light, like a man who had not genuinely rested in a very long time and had stopped expecting to. "Cassandra," he said. "Father." She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. The visitor's chair, the one that was slightly lower than his, a design choice that she had always understood was not accidental, and that she had always, until this moment, accepted without comment. She sat in it now, and felt the asymmetry, and noted it, and did not stand up, because the point was not the chair. He sat. He looked at his hands for a moment, a gesture she had never seen from him before, that downward look, as though the hands contained information he was consulting, and then he looked at her. "You've been to see Ophelia Salvador," he said. It was not a question. She had not expected it to be. "Yes," he nodded. A single movement, minimal, the nod of a man receiving news he had been waiting for long enough that its arrival produced nothing so specific as surprise. "And the necklace." Burned. Something moved through his face. She received it. That was the word now. Received. Not read or interpreted, but received. The way you received a transmission. And what she received was complex and layered, and not what she had prepared herself for. There was grief in it. Not for the necklace, for something older and larger. The kind of grief that had no clean object, that had spread over time until it covered everything and could no longer be attributed to any single loss. There was also, beneath the grief, something she identified only slowly and with significant surprise. Relief. "Father," she said. He looked at her. "I know what you did to Mother." The room was very quiet. He did not deny it. She had not expected him to. Had prepared herself for denial, for the careful construction of alternative explanations, for the version of this conversation in which she spent an hour dismantling defenses. Instead, he simply sat with what she had said, in the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for a specific door to open and, now that it has, finds they have nothing left to put against it. "I'm aware," he said. 3 words, the weight of 30 years in them. Cassandra sat with this. She had rehearsed anger on the walk back from the merchant's quarter, had felt it building in her chest with the clean, righteous energy of something that knew exactly where to go. She had been prepared to be a woman confronting a man with the evidence of his crime, to be precise and devastating and entirely controlled. What she had not prepared for was this. The man across the desk from her was not the monster she had needed him to be in order to be angry. He was something considerably harder to manage. A person. A broken one. A man who had made choices from fear and pain that he had never recovered from and never been permitted, by his own design, to recover from, and who had been living in the wreckage of those choices for so long that the wreckage had become simply the landscape of his existence. She closed her eyes. And then something extraordinary happened. It arrived the way everything arrived now. Without announcement, without her seeking it, simply present because it was ready to be present. She heard, or felt, or received. She still did not have the precise word for what this was. A voice. Not Alpha King Menelik's voice, not Ophelia's, not her mother's, which she would have recognized immediately. A voice she had never heard before and somehow knew completely. It was her father's voice. But not her father's voice as she had ever heard it. Not the measured, authority-weighted tones of King Connor Silverchannel in his study. This was something underneath that voice, something that existed at a different register entirely. Something that could only be heard now, in this room, with the necklace gone and her gifts fully awake, and the particular quality of attention she was bringing to this moment. It was his soul, and his soul was speaking freely, without editing, without the management that shaped every word that reached the surface. My human self was afraid. So afraid of being surpassed, of being left behind, of what people might think, of loving something I could not control. I did what I did from fear, and I have spent every year since then becoming more afraid. Then another voice came in, her mother's voice. My child, now that I'm on the other side, I've reconciled with everything. Your father and I have a karmic bond. Some say you marry your enemy from a past life. I was the person who betrayed him first. In our past life together, he was my apprentice. I was a priestess of the sun god in ancient Kemet. People revered my powers and my capabilities. She paused. Visions of the past were flashing through Cassandra's eyes. She could see. I lost my divinity somehow by caring more about things I couldn't take with me in the afterlife. He was becoming more powerful each passing year, and in my limited understanding, I felt it like a threat. I poisoned him, threw his body to the crocodiles, and nobody knew what I did. I spent centuries before I could forgive myself and remember that no one but me can judge myself. That's exactly when I found the light again. And our souls had an agreement. This time, he would do to me what I did to him, to set the record straight. We are great soulmates, friends for life. I needed to understand what being betrayed means too, and my soul has evolved beyond measure from that experience. That's why, my beloved child, no one shall judge so easily. One may have done worse than the exact sin they despise. Your father will have to remember too. He is loved by all there is, unconditionally. Always. She opened her eyes. King Connor Silverchannel was looking at her with the expression of a man who did not know what she had just perceived, and would not have believed it if she had told him, and yet who seemed, in some way she could not fully explain, to have felt the quality of her attention shift. There is something I need to tell you, she said, and I need you to listen without speaking until I've finished. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. She told him what she had received, not in the language of accusation, not in the register of a prosecutor presenting evidence, but simply as what it was, information. A transmission from a level of reality that did not require his belief to be true. She told him about the soul contract. She told him that his soul, and Sylvia's soul, had met before this life, had been bound, in another time and another form, that he was supposed to be a great master teacher, and that Sylvia had poisoned not a body but a destiny, and that the contract between them, the one that had drawn them together in this life, in this marriage, in this particular configuration of love and harm, had been a contract of completion, of return, of the karma of one betrayal met by another, until the pattern was seen clearly enough by someone in the lineage to be transmuted rather than repeated. She told him about forgiving oneself. King Connor Silverchannel's face as she spoke was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. She watched him receive it, watched the careful, decades-old architecture of his self-presentation encounter something it had no defense against. Because there was no defense against the truth arriving in the voice of your own youngest daughter, who should not know any of this, and who is not accusing you, not condemning you, simply telling you what is. When she finished, the room held the particular quality of silence that followed things that could not be unsaid. He stopped, started again. How do you... I know, she said simply. He looked at his hands again. That gesture. She understood it now. He was looking for somewhere to put things that had no container. I cannot... His voice, which had controlled rooms and kingdoms for 30 years, was doing something at its edges that she had never heard from it. I cannot undo it. No, she said. You can't. Then what? There is something that can be done, she said. Not undone. Done. She paused, feeling her way through the territory of this carefully, following something that was not logic, something older and more reliable than logic. The karma can be transmuted, not erased, transmuted. The energy of the betrayal returned to its source, purified, released. The contracts dissolved. She paused. But it requires something from you. What? Acknowledgement, she said. Not to me. To yourself. To whatever part of you still knows the difference between who you are and what you have done. A long silence. Then very quietly something happened in the room. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in the atmosphere. A loosening of something that had been held at significant cost for a very long time. A man removing a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten it was separate from him. King Connor Silverchannel covered his face with his hands. She sat with him through it. She sat with him through it. She did not speak. She did not offer comfort in the conventional sense. No hand on the shoulder, no reassuring words, no attempt to make the moment smaller than it was. She simply remained present, steady, entirely undisturbed by the weight of what the room now held. When it had passed, she said, "May I try something?" He looked at her. His eyes, blue, always so distant, so carefully managed, were wet. He nodded. She closed her eyes. She reached inward, to the place she was only beginning to learn existed. The place where the priestess in her had always lived and waited. She asked, not in words but in intention, in the clear and specific direction of a will that knew what it wanted, and had finally, for the first time, the capacity to act on it. She asked the lineage to be purified, to take the karma of betrayal and return it to its source as love, to dissolve the contracts of pain that had bound these two souls across time, to purify the traumas and the fears and the decisions made from those fears and send them, each one, to whatever realm of existence could receive and transform them. To liberate every memory, every wound, every inheritance of harm, and to free the people who had been living inside them. She felt the warmth in her chest first, then in her hands, then filling the room, slow and total, the way warmth filled a room that had been cold for a long time, not sudden, not dramatic, but absolutely real and absolutely there. She opened her eyes. "I need to know," she said quietly, "that it's complete. I need a sign." She felt it before it happened. The gathering of something just outside the room's ordinary dimension. A presence that was not in the room, but was not far from it. A warmth and a particular quality of love that she recognized with her whole body before her mind had processed it. Her eyelids flickered. Rapidly, involuntarily, the way they flickered when something moved fast across your vision. But there was nothing moving fast. The flickering was the signal. She had asked for it, and it had been given, and she understood, with the complete certainty of someone receiving rather than interpreting, that it was done. She looked at her father, and then she heard her mother's voice. Not in the room, not in sound, but in the way she now heard everything that arrived from the other side of what was visible. Clear, close, entirely without grief. "My darling, I am so proud of you. Do not worry about me. I have been in the light for a long time. Your grandmother is waiting to teach you. She will find you. Go now, your life is waiting." Cassandra's eyes filled. She did not try to stop it. She looked at her father. This man who had done terrible things, and was sitting in the wreckage of them with his eyes wet, and his hands in his lap, and something, she thought, marginally lighter than he had been when she came in. And she found, to her own surprise, that she had no anger left. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, and perhaps not entirely, and she understood that was allowed. but no anger. The anger had been transmuted along with everything else, returned to whatever the original substance was, before it became anger. "I'm leaving," she said, "with the Gryffindor delegation." He looked at her. "I know," he said. Those two words again. But different this time. Not the weight of guilt, but something simpler and sadder and in some way more honest. The acknowledgement of a man who had always known, somewhere, that the daughters he had tried to diminish were larger than the diminishment, and that the day would come when one of them simply walked out the door and into the life she was built for. She stood. At the door she stopped. "Father." He looked up. "Claudia and Alicia. Do whatever it takes to give them back their life. They deserve it." His eyes widened fractionally. "I will know," she said, "and I will follow their becoming. Whatever changes in them, I will feel it, wherever I am. This is something you can actually do." She walked out of the study and closed the door quietly behind her. And in the corridor she stood for a moment with her hand on the stone wall, and her mother's voice still warm in her chest, and felt, underneath the grief and the enormity of the morning, the overwhelming surge of powers she had no vocabulary for yet, the revelations about family secrets, and the particular exhaustion of having transmuted a generation's worth of karma before sunset. Free, for the first time in her life, entirely, irrevocably, unmanageably free. The library of the Silver Channel Palace was a room that had been designed for appearance rather than use. Tall shelves of leather-bound volumes, arranged with the careful symmetry of objects chosen for their effect on the eye rather than their effect on the mind. Alpha King Menelik had spent exactly 1 hour in it since his arrival, and had formed his conclusions. Beta Stanford Crest had found him there anyway. He appeared in the doorway with the particular quality of presence he used when he had something to say, and had already decided how to say it. Quiet, direct, entirely without the diplomatic layering he applied in rooms that required it. He was now wearing the guard's uniform. There was no need to pretend anymore. Beta Stanford Crest looked at him, the blue-green eyes that missed very little, and apologized for missing nothing. "You knew he would sign the treaty." "I knew he was ready to stop," Alpha King Menelik said. "Men who have been carrying what he has been carrying for 30 years are looking for someone to hand them a reason to put the weapon down." He looked at the fire across the room. "We gave him the reason. The rest was simply waiting." Beta Stanford Crest was quiet for a moment. Outside, the palace corridors were beginning to settle into their evening configuration. The shift of guards, the distant sound of the kitchens, the composite noise of a large household finding its night rhythm. "And the girl," Beta Stanford Crest said. Alpha King Menelik looked at him. Beta Stanford Crest held his gaze with the steady equanimity of a man who had long since earned the right to ask the questions other people didn't. The reports said she was quiet, reserved, a king's daughter who had learned to fit inside her circumstances. "The reports were describing the necklace," Alpha King Menelik said, "not her." "And what is she without the necklace?" Alpha King Menelik was quiet for a moment. He thought of the morning forest, the sword in her hand, the hawk overhead, her amber-green eyes after the clasp had separated from her skin, the full scale of what had poured through her in the first unguarded seconds of being entirely herself. "She put me on the defensive with a sword she had never held," he said. Beta Stanford Crest blinked, once, slowly, the blink of a man recalibrating. "She is a priestess of the 3 realms," Alpha King Menelik continued. "The bloodline is unbroken in her. Everything her father tried to suppress, everything the necklace held at bay. It was not destroyed. It was preserved." A pause. "She will become more powerful than any practitioner of her lineage in 4 generations. Possibly more." "And your wolf," Beta Stanford Crest said. "Not a question. Recognized her the moment I entered the room." Alpha King Menelik's voice was even. "Before I saw her face." Beta Stanford Crest absorbed this in the particular silence he used when he was processing something significant, and doing it completely before responding. "Then, when do we leave?" "Before dawn." Alpha King Menelik looked at him directly. She is coming with us. You've asked her. I did. And the Luna ceremony will happen when she is ready and not before. Alpha King Menelik's voice carried the particular finality of a man who has made a decision and is communicating that the decision is not available for further discussion. She has spent 22 years being told who she is by other people's choices. I will not add my name to that list. Beta Stanford Crest was quiet again. Then quietly and entirely without ceremony. Your parents would have liked her. Alpha King Menelik looked at the flames. His parents, his father, who had ruled with the particular combination of strength and warmth that Alpha King Menelik had spent 10 years attempting to equal. His mother, whose laughter had been the sound the pack associated with safety. The two of them bound by a fated mate bond so complete that when his father died, his mother had followed within the season, not from illness. From the simple physiological fact of a bond that did not know how to exist in only one body. He had grown up watching that bond. Had understood, from the time he was old enough to understand anything, both its beauty and its cost. He had spent 10 years believing he might not live enough to encounter that kind of soul bond. The candidates his council presented, suitable, accomplished, entirely correct in every way that could be measured and wrong in every way that mattered, had confirmed this belief so consistently that he had stopped examining it. Tell me about the dragons, Beta Stanford Crest said. Alpha King Menelik looked at him. Beta Stanford Crest gestured toward the tattoo at the base of his throat. You've never told me, not fully. I know the bloodline. I know the archive exists, and that only 2 people can access it. I know what the seers have said. A pause. Tell me what you actually believe. Alpha King Menelik was quiet for a long moment. The shifter wolves, he said, appeared first as lichens. They evolved, over centuries, through the bond between humans and the oldest creatures of the earth. The wolves became teachers. They showed early humans what it meant to be part of a pack, to run, to belong to a territory rather than simply occupy it. He paused. The dragons were older. Beta Stanford Crest said nothing. The dragons were the children of the phoenix, Alpha King Menelik said. The immortal birds, the ones that died and returned from their own fire, endlessly, carrying the memory of every life they had lived. When the phoenix line began to evolve, began to differentiate, some became what we call dragons, larger, wingspanned differently, fire carried internally rather than as external transformation. He looked at the fire across the room. They bonded with humans the way the wolves did, but differently. The wolf bond was a pack bond. The dragon bond was singular. One dragon, one human, a partnership across lifetimes. And the Dragoneers, Beta Stanford Crest said, were those humans, the ones whose bloodline carried the memory of the original bond strongly enough that it could be reactivated. They did not tame dragons. That is the wrong word entirely. They remembered them, and the dragons remembered them. He paused. The last Dragoneer in the Gryffindor line died 3 generations ago. The bond went dormant. The dragons retreated. To where? To the place where the veil is thin, Alpha King Menelik said. Between the visible realm and the realm of spirits. The 3rd realm. The one the priestesses of the 3 realms have always been able to access. He looked at his hands. At the dragon tattoo, he could feel rather than see. The archive says that the return of the dragons requires 2 things. The reactivation of the Dragoneer blood, which requires the bond, and a priestess who can open the channel between realms. Beta Stanford Crest was very still. You believe she can do it, he said. I believe, Alpha King Menelik said, that the hawk arrived in the eastern forest 2 years ago. That my shamans said it was waiting. That it was above the road tonight with a wingspan that was not a hawk's wingspan. He looked at Beta Stanford Crest directly. I believe that the archive was written 300 years ago and describes us both with a precision that should not be possible. And I believe that what I felt the moment I saw her across that room was not coincidence or chemistry or diplomatic convenience. He stopped. Beta Stanford Crest looked at him, the way he had been looking at him for 11 years, with the comprehensive attention of someone who had made it his purpose to understand this man fully and had mostly succeeded. "You are afraid," Beta Stanford Crest said. It was not an accusation. It was simply what it was. Accurate, offered without weight. The kind of truth that only a person with Beta Stanford Crest's particular combination of loyalty and honesty could deliver without it costing something. Alpha King Menelik said nothing for a moment. "My parents' bond," he said finally, "was the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. And it ended with my mother following my father into death, because she did not know how to exist without him." He paused. "That is what a fated mate bond costs, if it is lost." "Yes," Beta Stanford Crest said. "Knowing that, you would choose it anyway," Beta Stanford Crest said. "You chose it the moment your wolf recognized her. You have simply been giving yourself time to arrive at the decision consciously." The fire moved. Outside, a nightbird called once from the direction of the old garden, and was quiet. "Yes," Alpha King Menelik said. "I would choose it anyway." Beta Stanford Crest rose, unhurried, without ceremony, the movement of a man who has completed what he came to do and is satisfied with the completion. "Before dawn," he said. "Before dawn." Beta Stanford Crest moved toward the door and stopped. "My king," he said, "for what it's worth." A pause. "I have waited 11 years to see you afraid of something that mattered." As he left, she appeared in the doorway. Alpha King Menelik felt her before she arrived, the particular frequency of her presence, which he was already learning the way you learned a piece of music you intended to know for the rest of your life. He turned. She stopped. Her eyes went to Beta Stanford Crest's retreating figure in the corridor, then back to Alpha King Menelik, and then, with the specific sharpness of someone whose perceptions had been fully awake for less than a day and were already operating well beyond what most people achieved in a lifetime, to Beta Stanford Crest's clothing, the guard's uniform. He watched her process it, watched the pieces arrange themselves, the gala, the presentation, the man she had seen receiving the diplomatic greetings of assembled nobles and had assumed was the Alpha King of the Gryffindor territories. The man who had been 2 steps to the left, in plain dark wool, watching her from the shadow. She looked at Alpha King Menelik. "He was the king," she said, "for 2 days. And you were the guard. It was necessary to speak with your father as a man speaks when he believes no one important is listening." She absorbed this, not with the outrage he had half prepared for, but with something that was closer to recognition. The particular expression of someone encountering a tactic they would have used themselves. "Clever," she said. "Effective," he said. The corner of her mouth moved, that almost smile he had been cataloging since the terrace, the one that appeared when she encountered something she found genuinely interesting and had not yet decided whether to admit it. She came into the room and sat, not in the visitor's chair, but in the chair Beta Stanford Crest had just vacated, instinctively choosing the position of the person who had just left, as though she had already understood that Beta Stanford Crest's role in this conversation had concluded, and hers was beginning. He found this, in a way he did not attempt to account for, entirely characteristic. "Tell me who you are," she said. "Truly," he told her. Not the version in the diplomatic briefs, not the political history of the Gryffindor pack, or the catalogue of his military decisions, or the 10 years of a reign that the continent had described in the language of power and strategy, and the occasional slightly odd rumor. He told her the version that existed in the archive, in the bloodline, in the tattoo at his throat, that had been placed there not as decoration, but as identification, a living mark of a lineage that predated the Gryffindor kingdom by centuries. He told her about the phoenix. "The oldest texts," he said, "do not begin with wolves. They begin with fire, with birds that carried fire inside them, not as a weapon, but as a nature, that died and returned, that accumulated, across each death and return, the memory of every life they had inhabited." He paused. "The phoenix is not a myth. It is a description. The oldest shifters were not wolves. They were the ones who bonded with the firebirds, who carried that memory in their blood across generations. She was watching him with the complete, unhurried attention she brought to everything that mattered to her, and he could feel her receiving it. Not just hearing the words, but receiving the frequency beneath them, the truth that existed at the level below language. "The dragons," she said, "are the descendants of the phoenix. The phoenix line diversified over millennia. Some remained birds, some evolved, grew larger, carried the fire differently, developed the wing structure we associate with dragons. They are not separate creatures. They are the phoenix, evolved." He looked at her. They did not disappear. They retreated to the place between realms, the place where the world is thin, where the visible and invisible overlap. "The third realm," she said, "which a priestess of the 3 realms," he said carefully, "can access." She was quiet for a moment. "You think I can reach them?" she said. "I think," he said, "that the hawk in the garden was a message, that the thing above the road tonight was not a hawk, and that the archive, 300 years old, describes a priestess whose gifts include the ability to communicate across the boundaries between realms." He held her gaze. "I think that what you can do, fully trained, fully awake, is something neither of us can entirely predict yet." She looked at the fire. He watched her face, the amber-green eyes, the quality of thought moving through her, the particular expression of someone who is encountering the full dimensions of their own life for the first time and finding it larger than they had imagined even in their most unguarded moments. "My whole life," she said quietly, "I dreamed smaller." "Yes," he said, "you did." She looked at him. "And in your territory, with your shamans, your archive, your world, you will learn what you are," he said. "All of it. Everything the necklace held back. Everything your bloodline carries. Everything the 3rd realm will show you when you walk into it with your gifts fully open." A pause. "It will not be simple, or safe, or predictable." "Good," she said immediately. He looked at her. "I have had simple and safe and predictable for 22 years, she said. "I would like to try something else." The fire moved between them. "Come with me," he said. Not a command. He had promised himself it would not be a command, that whatever she decided would be decided freely, without the weight of the bond, or the pull of the archive, or any of the 17 forces currently operating in his favor. He said it the way he would have said it if none of those forces existed. Simply, "Come with me." 1 man to 1 woman, across a firelit room, with everything he had on one side of the words, and everything she was deciding on the other. She looked at him for a long moment, and what she said was not yes, and was not I will, and was not any of the words he had prepared himself to receive. She said, "I've already decided. I decided in the forest this morning when I felt the roots under my feet and understood that I had been living above my own life for 22 years. She paused. "The pull between us is not the reason I'm coming. It is confirmation of a decision I had already made." Something moved through him, large and warm and entirely unmanaged, which was unusual enough that he simply let it move. She saw it happen. He knew she did. She received things too precisely for it to have passed her by. And she did not look away from it, which was the thing he had understood about her from the first moment on the terrace. She did not look away from things. He crossed the room. He moved the way he moved when he had stopped calculating, directly, completely, with none of the careful management that governance and strategy and 10 years of being the most powerful person in every room required. He came to where she was standing, and he looked at her, and the bond between them sounded at its full frequency, and the dragon tattoo pulsed once at his throat, and he was done with distance. He kissed her. This was a return. That was the only word for it. A return. The specific sensation of something finding its way back to a place it had been before. A recognition so complete that the concept of first became entirely inaccurate. It was not a beginning. It was a resumption of something that had been interrupted, that had been waiting in the archive and the hawk and the bond and the ancient frequency around him, for however long these two particular configurations of soul had been navigating toward each other. She made a sound against his mouth, not surprise, not quite. The sound of someone arriving somewhere they had been trying to reach. He held her face in his hands and kissed her the way he had not allowed himself to on the terrace, with none of the evening's restraint. And she kissed him back with the same totality she brought to everything that actually mattered to her. And he felt, in the complete and specific aliveness of the moment, the last of the distance he had been maintaining for 10 years simply ceased to exist. When they parted, it was only far enough to breathe. Her eyes were amber and green and entirely open. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was different, lower, steadier, carrying something beneath it that she had not had in her voice before, or that she had always had, and was only now permitting to be audible. "Tell me, when you kissed me," she said, "I received something from the bond." She paused, and in the pause he felt her sorting through the vocabulary of her new gifts, finding the right words for things that did not yet have established names. Information about what we are, about what the mark means, the claiming mark, about what it seals. She looked at him directly. "I understand what it is. I understand what it costs, and what it gives, and what it means for everything that comes after." He was very still. "I am telling you," she said, "that I am ready, completely. Not because the bond is pulling me toward it, though it is, but because I have received the full information, and I am choosing it with everything I am." A pause. "I want you to mark me." The fire behind her cast her in warm light. The blonde hair, the amber-green eyes, the woman who had stood in a morning forest and put a sword to him and wept over her mother's letter and transmuted 3 decades of karma before sunset, and was now standing in a fire-lit library telling him, in the clearest possible language, that she was choosing him. "Cassandra," he said. "Yes," she said, simply, finally, the word landing with the weight of everything it meant. He drew her close, both arms around her, her body against his, and he bent his head to the curve of her neck and shoulder, the place where the claiming mark was placed, the place that the pack bond recognized across every shifter alive. He felt her breath change, felt her hold it, not from fear, from the particular stillness of someone preparing to receive something significant. He marked her. She gasped. And then, and this was the thing he had not been prepared for, the thing that no intelligence report or archive or seer's vision had described adequately, the room changed. Not physically. In the quality of what existed between them, which expanded in the moment of the mark from the frequency of 2 people bonded to something vastly larger, the history of the bloodline, every priestess who had walked the 3 realms, every dragonnier who had ridden fire across a sky that no longer existed, all of it present, briefly and overwhelmingly, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She saw them. He could feel it through the bond, could feel what she was receiving as she received it, the vision moving through her like light through a prism, separating into its component frequencies. Dragons. Enormous and particular, fire-colored and ancient, not the monsters of human fearfulness, but the descendants of the phoenix, carrying in their bones the memory of every death and return. And women, luminous, each one, standing in the threshold places of the world, the thin places where the realms overlapped, standing there not as bridges to be crossed but as doors that decided what passed. Communicating without words, mind to mind, soul to soul, the telematic language of a lineage that had always operated at a frequency above ordinary speech. She was one of them. She had always been one of them. The vision passed. The room returned to its ordinary dimensions. The fire, the books, the night beyond the window. She was in his arms, and his arms were around her, and the bond between them resonated at a frequency that was not 2 separate notes in proximity but a single chord, complete, requiring nothing added and losing nothing removed. He lifted his head. She looked up at him. Her eyes were glowing, amber and green and lit from something interior that had nothing to do with the fire behind her. And her face held an expression he had no prior reference for. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Something larger than both. The specific, total expression of a person who has spent their entire life feeling like an outline and has just finally been filled in. "My mate," he said. His voice was rough with something that had no name and required none. "My queen." She looked at him. This man of sealed archives and Dragonblood and silver-touched temples, and a certainty about her that had preceded his knowledge of her by 300 years. And she felt it. Not the bond. She had felt the bond since the forest. Not the mark. She had felt the mark settle into her skin like a truth that had always been true. Something beneath both of those. Something that was simply, entirely, irrevocably hers. She had stopped erring. The low-grade, continuous, bone-deep ache of living in the wrong life. Of fitting herself into spaces that were too small. Of running in secret and hearing hawks alone and wishing she were someone with a purpose. Was gone. Not healed. Gone. As though it had been a symptom of an absence that had now been filled, and the symptom had no more reason to exist. She thought of everything she had dreamed in her most unguarded moments. The forest. The freedom. The purpose. Being known completely by something she could be completely herself with. She had dreamed it all, in fragments, in the secret hours of her secret life. She understood now that she had dreamed small. Not because her dreams were small, because she had not had the vocabulary for what was actually available. She had not known about the archive or the third realm, or the dragons who were waiting in the thin place for a priestess who could open the channel. She had not known about the pack, or the hawk that had been waiting 2 years, or the claiming ceremony that would make her Luna of a territory she had not yet seen. She had not known that her gifts would allow her to hear souls and receive transmissions from women who had stood in threshold places across generations. She had dreamed of running in the forest. What was opening in front of her was the forest and the sky above it and the realm beyond the sky, and everything that existed in the places where the world was thin. More than she could have imagined, even in her wildest, most secret, most unmanaged hours of wanting. She reached up and placed her palm flat against his chest, against the dragon tattoo at his throat, against the pulse of the ancient frequency that had been the first thing she received from him, and would be, she understood now, with her always. "I know," she said. She did not specify what she knew. She did not need to. He received it through their connection. Completely, without editing, with the full attention of someone whose entire interior had been oriented toward this person for longer than either of them had been alive. He kissed her again. Softer, the specific softness of something that has stopped needing to prove itself. And she kissed him back, and the fire moved behind them. And somewhere above the palace, a great winged shape turned once against the night sky, and turned again, and was still. If you want to know Cassandra's destiny in the Eastern Kingdom, the dragons that retreated to the realm where the veil is thin, the Dragoneer archives that hold more mysteries than one season can contain, the training that will make her the most powerful priestess in 4 generations, and the origin of Alpha King Menelik Gryffindor that even he does not yet fully know. Drop a comment below. Tell us you want Season 2. Magic is in your hands too.